Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flex here with another one of my 52-week movie challenges from Everyone's a Critic. We are on week 50. The film challenge is a film celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. The movie I chose, Tales from the Crypt, year released 1972. Aspect ratio 1851, runtime 1 hour and 32 minutes. It is a horror anthology, rated PG. It was at one point rated R, but got re-categorized to PG, probably rightfully so. Starring Joan Collins, Peter Cushing, Ralph Richardson, Jeffrey Belden, and Martin Bodie, or Body. Directed by Freddie Francis. Produced by Hammer Horror Pictures. Written by Milton Subotsky. Based on the stories by Al Fieldstein, Johnny Craig, William M. Gaines, Graham Ingalls, and George Evans. Music by Douglas Gamery. Awards received? None. Why did I choose this particular film? I went back to the movies that came out in 1972, and nothing that I hadn't already seen before had really appealed to me, and there was a couple that I wanted to revisit, but in maybe a little more longer form, such as The Last House on the Left. But this one is one that I always had a fondness for, and it's been probably a good 5 to 10 years since I've seen it, so I wanted to revisit it. Have I seen this movie before? Yes. Would I recommend this film? Why or why not? This is my favorite anthology film. It is really fun, captures the potency of those old EC comics. Tales from the Crypt is an old EC comic, which would later be popularized in the 90s through the HBO TV show and the Crypt-Keeper and whatnot. And while I like that show and it captures a certain feel of the comics, at least visually, I think this one captures the tone of the comics a little better. It picked at least 3 fantastic stories. There are 2 that are a little weaker, and they're the middle chapters. So, like, the first story stars Joan Collins, a woman who murders her husband on Christmas Eve at the same time that an escaped lunatic breaks from a high-security prison, steals a mall Santa costume, and is going door to door picking people off. And when he gets to her house, she is unable to call the cops because she has to hide the evidence of the murder of her husband. The glory of the EC comics was always in that you would see people kind of doing scummy things and getting exuberant comeuppances for it. And that story itself is probably the prime example of what Tales of the Crypt could be or should be. And a great launch story for what this film was going to turn into. The second story is the first story that I said was a little on the weaker side, involving a man leaving his family and getting into terrible wreckage and him journeying back to finding his family. It's not bad, it just seems very filler, like they didn't have enough space in the film to make it an actual movie, so they needed another story, and this is the one they went with. It's the least effective story of all of them. And even though it does have a decent kind of jump scare in it, it just feels very dismissible and ultimately the most forgettable. The third story of the bunch is like a haunting story. It's the story that stars Peter Cushing in the supporting role of it, where this man wants to, doesn't like his neighbor across the street. He's a homeless-looking fella, even though he has a home, who all the children come and play with, and he finds old toys and refurbishes them to give to the children. Peter Cushing is the old man who looks very worn. He's dressed kind of hobo-ish, and this is an exploration of prejudices based on how we appear. And Cushing gives just a hauntingly sad and ultimately poetic performance of this man who's losing everything but still trying to find little glimpses of joy, and what that neighbor does to push him over the edge, which leads to a poem, a series of poems aimed back and forth at each other, is just tragic. But so good in the poetic kind of justice way. And Peter Cushing, a lot of people nowadays know him as Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars and Rogue One. But he was a mainstay of the Hammer horror films, oftentimes being more of the sympathetic character, and here he gives his possibly most sympathetic performance. He is so good. If I said this movie received no awards, had I been in charge of the Academy that year, that dude would have gotten a nomination for supporting actor. He is great, and he has like maybe 5 scenes total, 10 minutes of screen time or something like that. But he steals the show. And then the fourth story is the other weak one, which I think is only weak because it's one that we're familiar with. It's a reinterpretation of The Monkey's Paw. And it's a good interpretation of it, but I don't think it was a necessary scene. However, if you lift that story out, the movie's way too short to be a movie. So the 2 stories that I mentioned that are on the weaker side are clearly there to pad out the runtime. The last story is probably most people's favorite, and I think it's a great story about a man abusing people in the House of the Blind. He is a man living on sort of like a throne as the operator of this House of the Blind, making sure that he has all the luxuries afforded to him by taking the money and stuff from these people and making their living conditions almost impossible and unendurable. These people are freezing to death. They are starving to death. They are given gruel while he is given luxurious steaks. And so the blind people decide to band together and build a maze for the man to get his comeuppance. And it is, I'll let that sit there and watch the story as it unfolds, because it goes places that you're not going to expect. And I really enjoyed that story. That one also feels the most Tales from the Crypt. A book ends with the most Tales from the Crypt kind of stories that you could imagine. But this is a very fun movie, well acted. Joan Collins is fantastic in the opening one. I love the feel of that Christmas story. It feels the most authentically Christmas that I can think of, shy of like maybe 1 or 2 other movies that are iconic. But for non-iconic Christmas movies and visuals and songs and stuff like that, this deserves to be in the conversation, if only for that segment of the film. It isn't necessarily a scary movie, but it's a chilling movie. The horror comes from the evils that men can do, and it's a good movie. One that I highly recommend, and that I like to come back to from time to time. I first saw this when I was first getting into comics in high school, around freshman year of high school, and I used to watch it on repeat, so it's lost a lot of its luster, but having gone through and read a lot of those EC comics, Tales from the Crypt, Haunt of Fear, and something of Terror, gosh, I'm losing it, Vault of Horror, that's what it is, Vault of Horror. Having read those stories, I think this captures the whole comics vibe better than that TV show, which suffers from a lot of the worst elements of the HBO syndrome, i.e. being overtly graphic for the sake of being overtly graphic, both sexually and violent-wise. Not that it's a bad show, but I think it falls to the worst tendencies HBO has. This feels a little more Tales from the Crypty, and it's something that I think that deserves a comeback. Tales from the Crypt is such a great IP, and I don't know why we are not still getting it. This should be like a generational Twilight Zone kind of thing that gets revived every couple of years, either in film or television format. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Which character were you most able to identify with or connect with, and in what way? I think the old man played by Peter Cushing. He's just this sweet old man who's trying to do kindness and put kindness into the world, and is not getting that. Sorry, the cat just bumped that. What are you doing? Get away! The cat bumped the camera. That's the first time that's happened. But anyway, that was the character I probably most related to. Best line or most memorable quote. I don't know if there's any one line or most memorable quote. There's certainly visuals. I guess the poem that ends with "and now you have no heart" is pretty darn memorable. Were you surprised by the ending, and what would you do differently? So all of these stories are interconnected by the Crypt-Keeper. The Crypt-Keeper in this is just an old man in a cloak, which is somewhat similar to how he was presented in the comics, not the gangling, skeletal zombie creature that you got in the HBO show. And it's unnecessary. It's 5 people in search of an exit. 5 people get lost while they're on this search through this old castle and find themselves in this room. The Crypt-Keeper is there and then tells each of them their stories of why they are there before dropping them into the pit of hell. And it just isn't really necessary. I mean, I get why you want to put that there, but the Crypt-Keeper is so not cinematic or dynamic in any way, which he always was in the comics. And that's where the HBO show gets it really right. The Crypt-Keeper in the comics, or the old witch, or whatever, was always like cracking kind of a pun or a joke or something like that, that kind of bookended, and that was what I felt was missing. Had they done something a little closer to that, I would have been more satisfied. Do you feel this film has much impact now as it did when it was released 50 years ago? I honestly don't think it had much of an impact then. It impacted enough to get a sequel. The sequel had no splash of any kind. The greatest impact this story has is, or why this movie still exists, is because the popularity of that HBO show kind of revived it. Had that show not come out, I'm convinced we probably would never have seen this, certainly in the Blu-ray days. Maybe the VHS days, just because of Joan Collins and Peter Cushing, but because of that HBO TV show, this movie still exists, and I'm glad it does. It's quite good. Anything else I would like to add? Not really. It's good. There was a sequel called The Vault of Horror. Of that, there are 2 good stories in it. The other 3 are pretty lackluster, to say the least, even by this film's lackluster standards. So I get why that one kind of just fizzled away. But this is a good time to bring back the whole anthology horror format. Try to do a nice marrying of the two, the TV show, the things that got right, the Crypt-Keeper, the jokes, the vibrancy of color and stuff. Let's bring those elements with the storytelling elements of this, and allowing sincerity to be sincere, and the horror to not necessarily be visceral in a bloody, gory sense, but visceral in a very humanitarian sense. And we would have a fantastic series of TV shows or movies, however you want to go. But I would like to see a movie format continue on, anthology style. There are so many comics of from those 3 EC stories, story sets, Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear, Tales from the Crypt, that you could do this annually and have a new horror movie every Halloween. I don't know why they don't do it. Alright, Challenge 51, a film you personally relate to. Not gonna lie, that's a struggle, because the 2 that I can easily think of that come to mind are Clerks, or even Clerks 3, and I've reviewed those. So I'm gonna try and come up with something a little different, and we'll see how that goes. But thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Let me know what you thought of Tales from the Crypt in the comments down below. Peace.